When we think about the English Renaissance, our minds probably jump straight to the glorious golden age of Queen Elizabeth I. But what happens when a golden age ends? Well, today we're diving into the turbulent, complex, and honestly pretty fascinating period that came right after, the Jacobean Era.
So, this is the big question hanging over everyone's head in 1603. You've got this iconic, long-reigning monarch who's gone, creating a massive power vacuum, and, you can imagine, a deep sense of national anxiety. England was basically stepping off a cliff into the unknown.
And the answer to all that uncertainty? It came from the north. A new king, with a very, very different way of looking at the world, was about to take the throne, and things were going to get complicated. Okay, so in 1603, James VI of Scotland, who was the son of Elizabeth's cousin, Mary Queen of Scots, he comes down and becomes James I of England. And he does not waste any time. Right away, he starts pushing for this idea of a totally unified kingdom. By 1604, he's calling himself King of Great Britain, and a couple of years later, he even creates a new flag to symbolize it all, the Union Jack. Talk about a bold start. But here's the thing. This new king brought with him a political philosophy that was, to put it mildly, a huge challenge to the English way of doing things. And this set up the central conflict of his entire reign, a massive clash between his belief in his own God-given power and the very real authority of Parliament. James was a huge believer in something called the divine right of kings. For him, this wasn't just some abstract political theory, it was a sacred truth. He believed his power came directly from God, which meant he was only accountable to God. So, if you disobeyed the king, that wasn't just a crime, it was a sin. And this whole belief system was propped up by this concept called the Great Chain of Being. Think of it like a divinely ordered ladder for the entire universe. You've got God at the very top, the king is right below him as his representative on earth, and then everyone else has their own fixed rung. To even try to change your place in that chain, that was like shaking your fist at God's master plan.
But there was one teensy, giant problem with the king's whole I answer only to God thing. Parliament held the purse strings. That's right, they controlled the money, and they had the power to make laws. You can probably see where this is going, an inevitable collision course.
So you've got these two completely opposing viewpoints. On one side, the king, who sees himself as an absolute ruler, literally above the law. And on the other, you have Parliament, looking at a monarch with some seriously lavish spending habits, racking up huge debts and trying to push through taxes without their say-so. The stage was absolutely set for a decades-long power struggle.
And this tension, it wasn't just political. Oh no. It rippled through every part of society, fueling deep religious and social divisions. The Jacobean era became this crazy mix of conspiracy, intense faith, and the violent beginnings of a global empire.
Remember this date. It's a date that hangs heavy in English history, a moment of absolute crisis, a day when the entire kingdom nearly came crashing down.
Yep, you guessed it, we're talking about the Gunpowder Plot, a shocking assassination attempt that would forever burn the association between Catholicism and treason into the minds of many English Protestants. So what happened? Well, a group of English Catholics, with Guy Fawkes being the most famous, planned to literally blow up Parliament with the king inside. The goal was to ignite a revolution and get a Catholic ruler back on the throne. The plot's failure was a brutal symptom of the era's instability, and it led to a severe crackdown that just hardened the religious divides for generations to come.
And yet, in the middle of all this religious chaos, one of the most important cultural artifacts in the English language was created. Commissioned by King James himself, the King James Bible of 1611 wasn't just a religious text. Its beautiful, poetic language and unforgettable phrases literally shaped how people spoke and wrote for centuries.
This era also marks the violent dawn of England's colonial ambitions. In 1607, we see the first permanent English settlement at Jamestown in North America. Just 2 years after that, the plantation of Ulster kicks off the systematic colonization of Northern Ireland. And then in 1620, the Pilgrims land at Plymouth. These are foundational moments for what would become the British Empire, and they were all rooted in conflict and exploitation.
So, with an atmosphere full of political plotting, religious anxiety, and violent expansion, is it any surprise that the art of the time changed? That bright optimism of the Elizabethan age? Yeah, that gave way to something much, much darker and more questioning.
This quote just sums it up perfectly. Jacobean literature was like a mirror held up to the nation's anxieties. It was cynical, it was philosophical, and it was obsessed with themes of corruption, decay, and what it means to be human in a chaotic world.
Just look at this comparison. It's night and day, right? We go from the optimism and national pride of something like The Fairy Queen to the deep, dark cynicism of Shakespeare's greatest Jacobean plays, like King Lear and Macbeth. Plays all about powerful rulers being corrupted and destroyed. It's a massive shift.
But you know what's incredible? Out of all this uncertainty and doubt, a brand new literary form emerges. And it's one that was perfectly made for an age of questions. It was a new way to write, and maybe more importantly, a whole new way to think.
That form was the essay, and its name tells you everything you need to know. It comes from the French word essayer, which means to attempt or to test. It wasn't about shouting definitive answers from a mountaintop, it was about the messy human process of trying to figure things out.
And this is exactly why it was the perfect art form for the Jacobean era. The essay, pioneered by the French writer Michel de Montaigne, was flexible, it was personal, and it completely embraced doubt. It didn't pretend to have all the answers, in a world where it felt like all the old, certain answers were falling apart.
So when Montaigne's work gets translated into English in 1603, it has this massive impact. It influences key figures like Francis Bacon, who becomes England's first great essayist. And yeah, even Shakespeare himself. It was a form whose time had well and truly come.
Which really leaves us with one final thought that gets to the very heart of the Jacobean age. In a world of collapsing certainties, of political conflict and religious doubt, maybe, just maybe, asking the right question is more important than finding the right answer. Perhaps the journey of the attempt itself is what truly matters.